Okay, that's not entirely new to D&D. Even the previous editions have said, rogues favor dexterity, fighters favor strength, wizards favor intelligence. the What fourth edition does is um, it basically tells you, okay, these are the stats that you're going to want to have, and then you have a choice to make. You can, let's use the wizard as an example. You can play wizard type A, or you can play wizard type B. And if you play wizard type A, you want to put your attributes over here. If you play wizard type B, you want to put your attributes over here. And that's it. Now you do have some options in terms of choosing your powers, but that comes to another one of my issues. I won't get too far ahead of myself, but I will come back to powers in a second. So I mean, it's really like there is a degree of customization to your character class, but if you're smart, you're not going to stray too far from the advice that the book gives you, and that's because balance. And the reason why, to me, the main reasons why the classes feel so restrictive is because 4th edition is implicitly attempting to be very closely balanced. It's attempting the intention is for all players to feel equally important, for all players to feel equally special. I agree with that. That's been a staple of my gaming philosophy since the very beginning. It's a game. Everybody's supposed to have fun. Everybody's supposed to share in the fun. But everybody having equal participation in the game, and everybody being equally capable or balanced does not necessarily equate to the same thing. The problem that I see with 4th edition, one of the most obnoxious problems, is that the character classes are so balanced that if you really start to look at the classes, there's very little difference between them. And I'm not just talking about classes of the same type. For those of you not familiar with 4th edition implicitly, there are basically 4 different types of character classes. Basically 4 roles, and each class will fit into one of these roles to a certain degree. Those roles are basically your tank, your healer or leader, basically healer / buffer, your striker, who is basically your damage dealer, and your controller, who is responsible for kind of maintaining the field, controlling the enemy's movements, and laying out effects, status effects, and that sort of thing. But it's not just that one class feels like another tank class feels like another tank class. It's actually more profound than that. The balance is deeper than that, in that characters of even different classes start to feel the same, because let me give an example. Fighter, rogue, and fighter, wizard, and bard. 3 very different character classes. In concept. In previous editions, they were played very differently. They had very different strengths and weaknesses. They in 4th edition, they all have, amongst the powers that they can take, their lower level powers, they have, and I'm not quoting specific rules here, but for example, the fighter has a power that is, Fighty McFightenberg melee strike. I attack with my weapon, and I do a d10 damage plus my strength bonus, because I'm a fighter, so strength is good. The wizard has, magic missile, or I have a ranged basic attack, and when I use my ranged basic attack, I do a d10 damage plus my intelligence bonus, because I'm a wizard and intelligence is important. Intelligence is what I do. And then now, bard, I have a ranged attack, and it is, I think in this particular, I will use a particular example of throwing insults. Yeah, it's kind of stupid, but okay, whatever. I throw an insult, and I do a d10 damage plus my charisma bonus, because I'm a bard and charisma is important to me. So if you're seeing a pattern here, it's prevalent throughout the game. So, I mean, really, you've got a fighter, a wizard, and a bard, and they all have basically the same power. It's dressed up a little bit different. The fighter is, I'm attacking with my weapon. The wizard is, I'm blasting you with arcane energy, and the bard is, I'm insulting your mother and calling your mother, an orc. But they're the same thing. I mean, they do the same damage, plus your class's most relevant statistic, and that's it. And there are a lot of powers. I mean, there are a lot of powers in this game. Every class has dozens and dozens of powers, because they, you can acquire them as you go up in character level. But I mean, there's a lot of powers that look almost the same across different classes and even across different roles. Yes, eventually strikers actually have powers that do more damage, and defenders have abilities that help draw the enemies off, and controllers have abilities that do, that cover area of effects better and all this kind of thing. But I mean, there's a lot of overlap, and it's all about trying to be balanced. I mean, that's what the game is trying for. It's very clear that 4th edition wants to be balanced, and a certain amount of balance kind of, requires a certain amount of freedom and flexibility be taken away. And that's one of my core problems with 4th edition. And consequently, that's why classes feel restrictive, because they have to kind of shoehorn, in these abilities to keep them balanced with all the other classes. So you don't feel like many of your choices don't feel like they're significant, because it feels like you could be playing the same character, and you could be a different class, but you could be playing essentially the same character and be making the same choices and using the same powers. It's just it's dressed up a little bit differently. Third myth: it isn't D&D. This is one I will completely and totally speak out against, because I don't think there's really any validity to the argument that it's not D&D. Yes, it is not your grandfather's D&D. They've made some significant changes. They've introduced new races, they've introduced new classes, they've totally revamped the spellcasting system. It is different. It is a different D&D. But it's still D&D to me, because the reason why I say that is because the core concepts of it, it's about epic adventure of characters from different walks of life going out into the world, exploring it, and finding items of power and increasing their power so that they can tackle increasingly significant monsters, basically powering up in order to overcome greater and greater challenges. That's what it is. I mean, that's what D&D has always been. I mean, because entire sections of the book, or entire books themselves, are made up of basically magic items and monsters. The magic items being the things that help you fight the monsters. 4th edition is the same way. I mean, it's very much the same formula. A lot of the classes are still there. A lot of the races are still there. They still feel very much the same in a lot of ways. I mean, dwarves are still dwarves, and elves are still elves. Yeah, there's the Eladrin, who are kind of like the gray elf kind of weird twist thingy. But it still feels like D&D. You can still play it pretty much the same way that you used to, minus the rules and tactical combat concerns. But I don't see any validity to that argument, any real validity. I mean, you can say, well, it's different, but yeah, I mean, the prequel Star Wars trilogies were different from the classic trilogies, but they were still Star Wars. Yeah, they weren't very good Star Wars, and maybe that's saying something about D&D 4th edition. From my perspective, even though I'm not even a particularly big fan of D&D in general, 4th edition isn't particularly well crafted D&D, or at least a particularly respectfully respectfully crafted D&D, but it is still D&D. I mean, at its heart, it's still the same game. I mean, you're still powering up, fighting monsters, saving princesses, etc., etc., whatever it is that you do in your D&D games. So, anyway, I think I've gone on long enough. I certainly could probably ramble for another 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes on this game, but I don't think it would do anybody any justice. I'm not... It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not trying to bash the game. It's just not a game for me. It has no pretensions of being the kind of game that I enjoy. I gave it a fair share. When it first came out, I was enthusiastic enough about it. I thought it was going to be cool. And when I gave it a shot, and I just found out that it's not. It's not the game for me, and it's not the game that's going to get me back into D&D.